really, really enjoyed the film. I found it very uh unnerving, really got under my skin. I'm curious just to start things off, how did this project come to be? Why was this the story that you wanted to tell for your first narrative feature?
Um, uh, well, I just come off doing a documentary, which was a very long process, and it was a very challenging one. There were a lot of like cooks in the kitchen, and it was just frustrating. And I just felt like when I knew I wanted to do a narrative, and I wanted to do something which was small enough and contained enough to keep some level of control throughout. One of my like all-time favorite films and books is Woman of the Dunes, and that was just like the story within that was something that's always inspired me and has this built-in containment. Obviously, I didn't want to like remake that film. It's a perfect film, and yeah, and I wanted to do something which was mine, and so I was kind of like that was always in the back of my mind, and then just that central conceit. And then I was in the desert with my wife, and she was pregnant, and we were walking through, and impending fatherhood, and there in the desert, feeling like the kind of vulnerability of when you're in the desert, in the open desert, and the nature and surrounding you, the hugeness of it, and yeah, just on that walk, like everything kind of fell into place. This story, which was kind of on one level, I just got excited about it because on one level, it's very small and kind of like a small fable, but on the other hand, like dealing with these very large themes of primal themes of the cycle of life and whatnot, and it just excited me. So I just like ran with it from there, and then big fan of like 70s horror and that especially like I think the big influences on this was like Australian, a lot of Aussie stuff, Waking Fright, Picnic Hanging
Hanging
Rock.
Rock. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought of that too.
yeah,
Picnic at Hanging Rock. Yeah. Yeah.
totally. Walkabout as well. These films which are very much there's the plot, but they're also driven by the environment, really, I mean, what happens in Picnic Hang Rock? Not a lot. These girls go out and then they just disappear, and
Yeah.
but it's just the atmosphere within the film is just magnificent, and it's just like beguiling, and I've been kind of obsessed by that ever since I saw it, and then with something like Wake in Fright, you bring in the kind of like that the toxic masculinity angle, and but it's just that they just all have this kind of feeling of being very not at war, but like this constant battle with nature, and the environment, which is just very interesting to me. Yeah.
No, that definitely shines through in your project. I'm curious, given that you mentioned, Picnic at Hanging Rock and other influences, I definitely kind of felt other films. You mentioned 70s horror like Hills Have Eyes, even Texas Chainsaw
Yeah.
Massacre, things like that. How did you manage to just
Sure.
strike this? Yeah, how did you manage to strike that balance between kind of paying homage to and honoring these, some of them the classic films of cinema, while also making your film feel so novel, so original?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to just make a kind of like a 70s horror film, but the thing which I feel about those films is that they're just incredibly well made, great movies, that happen to be horror as well and happen to deal with like really intense stuff. And so just taking the way I guess like taking the approach, really like using the approach, which is like, treating it seriously. And also the other thing was something, a few things. One was like when I was writing it, I felt very much like uh, I'm like writing this crazy story and always thinking, is this too crazy? This is insane. And then, sure enough, some news headline would pop up, some awful story of, I don't know, some kids like being trapped in the basement or something, and it's just like, yeah, stuff happens,
Yeah.
here in America, it's such a huge country, and like, you go out and it's just like, uh, all sorts of horrific stuff can happen. So, like, having some level of attachment to reality in there was important for me. And also right down to all the levels of, like, wardrobe and production design, and always like being like, okay, this is like some old shack in the middle of nowhere, but at the same time it's like, there's a microwave in there. It doesn't work, but like the kids have found it on the side of a highway and like thrown it down to the pit, and she's like using it, so it's just kind of trying to always like root it in a contemporary world, but very much its own world, so that was a part of the approach as well. Yeah.
And I think that lends to the kind of like timeless quality of the horror,
Yeah.
right? Of how scary it can be
Yeah.
universally.
Sure.
I had the opportunity to speak with Scott Hayes recently, who I think is such a underappreciated actor, and child of God, and thank you for your service, especially. I found it really compelling in that.
Yeah.
What made him the perfect kind of lead for this film, in your opinion?
Funnily enough, I actually did not know Scott's work before somebody suggested him. I was in there, really the film got kind of cast pretty much in the 11th hour, actually. We're just like, going down. It was totally cast with a completely different cast at one point, and then we lost financing, had to put it back together again, and of course those actors were then unavailable. So um, I asked, I was asking everybody, and just one friend of mine suggested him, and I checked out his work, and I was just like, wow, this guy has a very a real ability, and also, I was looking for, obviously within the role, um, he starts here and then he goes to there. He
Mm,
really has to go, and a lot of actors are like brilliant over here,
mm,
amazing, but like to get to that point where you're, just at your like primal rawness, that's that's hard. And some, even like really great actors, you just don't see that in their work. And so it's
mm,
just kind of like, and I had a feeling from our first meeting that this guy was going to be, I don't know, he just has an intensity about him that even from our first conversation, I was like, yeah, I think he's going to be able to get there. He's going to get to that point that I need him to get him to at the end of the film. So and he did. It's just like, I remember. I don't want to give anything away, but I remember when we were shooting elements of the final act, and I was just like, was very happy because I just felt like I'd made the right choice. I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I saw, and he's going there and he's taking it somewhere else as well, which you always hope as the director. So yeah.
no, he's great in the movie, and you buy him at the very beginning and kind of the
Yeah.
man, the good Samaritan, right? But then
Yeah.
you also buy that transition.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think I maybe have time for one more question, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, so uh I wanted to ask you about the location. You mentioned it a little bit ago. It's the pit or the canyon is so
Yeah.
daunting and
Yeah.
gargantuan. What was it
Yeah.
like to find a location that matched what you had thought of in your mind while writing the script?
Well, it was very hard. Obviously, it's a very specific location, and honestly, it doesn't really exist. I mean, that what you're seeing in the film is not a entirely closed canyon. It is a little bit of post-production happening there, just to like seal it up. But we scouted, I mean, not physically, but we had scouts in Mexico, in Romania, in the Canary Islands, in Canada, all over basically. And yeah, one day this picture came over from Utah, and I don't know, it just was very, it just seemed so. I mean, the rocks, because the landscape, the canyon is, again, going back to what we are saying at the beginning of this interview, the canyon is the third character in this
Mm.
film, and so it's so important. And seeing these walls, how much character they have, and how ominous they can be, when you're like staring up at them. It just felt very it felt good, when I first saw it. I mean, there was things I didn't like about it. I didn't see it green, when I was writing it. It was much dustier in my mind, but this canyon had groundwater coming up, and it was kind of green, and which became very muddy, which was great in the end as well. But um and certain technical things, like it was like strong enough to support people standing up on the ridge. There's so many factors you have to think about. And also, like, it took, like, getting to and from the town, it was not too far, but it was super challenging though as well. And um I wasn't really able to appreciate there was like one moment one night where I kind of like looked up at the stars and saw this, like, the canyon above me, the ridge, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. But most of the time I was just in kind of my own personal hell, just as you are in these things, because it's a challenge, because as these things tend to be. But that was by design as well. Just like, never did I want this to be like a set. It was just, it had to be there. Build this shack in this space, live and breathe in this space, because so we're all feeling this level of claustrophobia, and and again, the kind of like tug and pull with nature.
Mm.